Originally, Payola referred to a label paying a DJ at a radio station extra money to play an artist's song more without disclosing this to the public. Though the practice had existed for decades before, the term payola was coined in the 1930s and is a combination of the words pay and victrola. Up to the mid-1930s, it was uncommon for labels or broadcasters to disclose exactly how they determined which songs were popular or why specific songs were played more than others. It was just noted that a song's popularity could be determined by not only the amount of times it was played on the radio, but also the amount of requests for the song or for the sheet music. Without TVs being commonplace or the existence of the internet, obviously, radio was essentially the only way to promote music without doing so in person. So an artist or group having adequate airtime to get their song played was crucial. This nationwide practice went on basically unchecked until the late 1950s when the federal government got involved. During investigations, it came out that some DJs were making tens of thousands of dollars in payola, far more than the average civil service job, for example. Another DJ named Wesley Hopkins admitted to making about $12,000 in payola, so money on top of his actual pay, in just 2 years. The average U.S. salary for a male back in 1960 was about $5,600. In a Vice article, I found another DJ named Phil Lynn admitted to receiving $22,000 just to play one record, and that would be almost $236,000 today. It was noted in Performing Songwriter that aside from the Dick Clarks of the world, even mid-tier DJs could average about $50 a week in payola or bribes from the record labels, and that would be a little over $500 a week today. Some DJs, labels, and publishers would all refer to this payola as a quote-unquote listening fee for the DJ, claiming the money was for their time spent evaluating whether they would play the song on the radio, which obviously they were going to because they were getting paid to do that.
So simultaneously, several hundred radio stations and the most important kid television station all played the same music. At that point, and it has been the case since time immemorial, you can bribe people to play your goods. In the old days, piano players in the Woolworth stores would get a $5 bill to play the sheet music so the customers would buy it. Television radio came along, payola came up. Disc jockeys would play records for pay. It was well known.
Sometimes they would be paid not just in money, but in gifts like vacations or appliances, anything valuable. And it was also relatively common for labels to come together and pay for conventions to butter these DJs up and network with them, aka figure out how much they'd have to pay to get an artist's song played. Apparently, what sent then-President Eisenhower over the edge and made him want to start criminalizing payola was a quote from the aforementioned Wesley Hopkins. He claimed, "This seems to be the American way of life, which is a wonderful way of life. It's primarily built on romance. I'll do for you, what will you do for me?" In early 1960, as a result of the so-called Payola scandal, the FCC proposed an act completely criminalizing the practice. The biggest issue here, according to them, was that the American consumer potentially could lose trust in the radio, as they could possibly come to assume few of any songs played on the radio were chosen organically. Because back then, and even for decades after, DJs were seen as a musical authority, once talented enough to curate a rotation that was favorable to contemporary taste, but also kept listeners abreast of the newest and hottest songs. After the Payola scandal, some hosts and DJs agreed to stop taking Payola money from labels and admitted to the government that they previously had.
People who worked for my record company were commissioned to pay disc jockeys to play records. It was normal. It was legal. We declared it. It was not illegal at that point. It became illegal in early 1960s when the Congress said, no more of this, it's against the law, you've broken the law, you can't do it. Still goes on to this day, except it isn't as blatant, it's much more subtle.
Others, like Alan Freed, who'd done a lot to coin and promote rock and roll, both in person and on the airwaves, refused to cooperate. And this effectively ended his career as he was later blacklisted. Though he obviously wasn't innocent, he's come to be considered as the fall guy in the Payola scandal because, as Vice put it, Freed was a heavy smoker, a jive talker, a rock and roll lifer who freely associated with black musicians and refused to betray his own principles by signing an affidavit swearing he'd never accepted payola. In addition, it was thought that between the two of them, ABC was going to back Dick Clark far more than they were going to back Freed because Dick Clark's show American Bandstand was raking in far more money for ABC than Freed's own programs were. And as you can imagine, payola becoming illegal did not stop the practice, it just made labels and DJs find loopholes to keep it going. One such loophole was having third-party promoters pay the DJs on behalf of a label or publisher, claiming their job was essentially to negotiate the radio play. Sometimes the labels wouldn't tell the promoters to pay the radio stations in cash, but in other means like paying for the giveaways they wanted to host, giving them exclusive tickets to their artist shows, things of that nature. In addition, there was also a loophole to be found in the wording of the amendment of the Federal Communications Act, which outlawed payola, or was intended to. The amendment outlawed under-the-table payments and required broadcasters to disclose if airplay for a song has been purchased. So technically, it wasn't illegal for a label or publisher to make a payment right to the radio station, rather than secretly to the DJ and just have the DJ disclose the radio station was paid to play the song. In this new practice, this loophole, if you will, has been said to be part of the reason Limp Bizkit's career ever took off. Looking into it further, there are several articles from 1998 not only covering their meteoric rise, but evaluating the legality or the morality of it. In 1997, Limp Bizkit signed jointly to Interscope and Flip Records. Soon after, because the group was struggling to get radio play and needed the promotion, the labels paid KUFO, a Portland station, $5,000 to play Limp Bizkit's single Counterfeit 50 times for 5 weeks straight. After the song played, it was followed with an announcement brought to you by Interscope, which disclosed to listeners KUFO had taken money to play Counterfeit, which is why the practice is often called pay-for-play now. The situation with Limp Bizkit basically standardized pay-for-play on the radio. In their 1998 article, the New York Times noted that in practice, pay-for-play didn't seem much different from payola. However, the station disclosing they got paid before the song aired was also likened to an infomercial, and I think today we'd consider it kind of similar to a sponsored post or something like that. Other sources from the 90s liken it to product placement, like seeing a Coke bottle in a movie. Coca-Cola obviously paid for that. And so essentially a lot of these labels, especially the big ones, were now acting like brands or more overtly like brands. In 1999, publisher Eric Rhodes claimed that pay-for-play wouldn't be a big issue because radio stations would still have to play songs people actually wanted to hear, and if they got too caught up in taking money over actually picking good songs, listeners would simply switch to a different station. He told the Daily News, "Any station that allows too many loser songs to be played will lose audience share and ad revenues." It's also easier for labels to pay these radio stations now because most of them are owned by media companies rather than independently, so a label can effectively pay for radio spots by just going to that owner and having those plays trickle down to the stations they own. I would think this also made it easier to either have songs played nationwide or target certain regions if an artist hadn't caught on over there yet. Another way this pay-for-play could be implemented was through programs, contests, or promotions between a brand and the media company that owns a radio station. And later on in the video, we actually are going to touch on a real example of this. In the summer of 2005, Sony BMG paid a $10 million settlement as a result of being investigated for their own Payola scandal. When trying to get one of their artists, Franz Ferdinand, more radio time in the US, they sent execs at WKSE, which is a radio station, on a vacation to Miami, which cost about $4,000. The investigation also found some radio station employees were paid off with electronics, they paid for the giveaways for some stations, and Sony BMG even paid for the operational expenses of some of these radio stations. According to The Guardian, then Attorney General Eliot Spitzer uncovered dozens of pages of correspondence between Sony BMG and radio stations trying to negotiate or bribe, allegedly, their way into getting their artists played. To give another example, one email from a Sony BMG employee to someone at Clear Channel reads, "What do I have to do to get Audio Slave on WKSS this week? Whatever you can dream up, I can make it happen." By the way, Clear Channel was bought out by iHeartMedia in 2008. And in their coverage of this investigation, CBS noted a separate Sony BMG employee told a radio station their trip to see Celine Dion in Vegas would be revoked if they didn't stop playing her song "I Drove All Night" in the middle of the night. After the investigation, Spitzer claimed, "Our investigation shows that, contrary to listener expectations that songs are selected for airplay based on artistic merit and popularity, airtime is often determined by undisclosed payoffs to radio stations and their employees." Days after the news of Sony BMG's settlement, Slate published an article titled, "What's Wrong with Payola?" In the subheading, they called Spitzer's investigation a pointless crusade on the music industry. They argue that in the decades since Payola was outlawed, it had basically become a consumer expectation that some deals were cut to make any product, not just a song, popular. In other industries, there's often no requirement to disclose things like this. Like, Oreo's parent company does not have a sign up saying they're paying to have their product displayed at eye level so that I'm more likely to buy it. The Slate article notes this is commonplace in bookstores also, that publishers might pay a retailer to have their author's book displayed front and center, which doesn't have to be disclosed either. The author, Daniel Gross, did make a fair point that a potential difference is that, like I mentioned earlier, we tend to think of DJs and radio stations at large as curators rather than sellers as we would a grocery or bookstore. Gross's point, however, was that Payola doesn't really harm consumers who are more than able to change a radio station if they don't want to hear a song repeatedly. And I guess in a way this ties back to Rhodes' idea that Payola was still self-regulatory, as listeners are going to tune out if a station plays too many bad songs too often. Another major difference in Gross's opinion was that, different from 1955 and 2005, I have the internet and my iPod so I can listen to whatever I want basically, whereas that wasn't so much the case previously. And likewise, artists had more avenues to promote themselves rather than being signed to a major label, he wrote. Sure, marketing blitzes and intense radio campaigns can help push undeserving artists onto the charts, but music today is pulled by consumers far more than it's pushed by conglomerates. Technology and competition have liberated listeners from the clutches of bad top 40 radio. Artists might not get the kind of promotion they want if the Sonys of the world are paying stations to play Celine Dion. But show me a content creator, writer, musician, actor who has ever been satisfied with the level of promotion his or her work received. Whether you agree with Gross, pay for play didn't go anywhere and hasn't. So let's get into a real-life example of this radio station company contest thing I was mentioning earlier. In 2014, the Washington Post published an article titled, "Clear Channels on the Verge Program Help Make Iggy Azalea a Star. Here's How It Works." Iggy was chosen as an On the Verge artist for iHeartMedia. Remember, they bought out Clear Channel back in 2008. Being an On the Verge artist, think of it like a Vivo Discover up-and-coming sort of thing, required iHeartMedia to play the song you were promoting at least 150 times. At the time, iHeart owned 840 radio stations and reached about 245 million listeners per month. And the song that was played across all of these iHeart stations was, of course, Fancy. The On the Verge artists were chosen by Clear Channel brand managers out of dozens of artists. And really, they were looking at the song more than the artist and voted on what songs listeners would like the most while also being introduced to someone new. Tom Pullman, Clear Channel Radio's president for national programming platform, said it was basically a responsibility of theirs to turn the public onto new artists since they had the biggest reach. He claimed they chose the 150 plays minimum because that's about how long it takes listeners to form an opinion on a song. The article went on to explain, each artist generally gets about 6 weeks on the spot, which gives the station enough time to rack up the required amount of spins. Before it's played, the song is usually introduced as an On the Verge artist with a quick clip of the singer telling the story behind the single. Of course, stations can go over 150 spins, and if the song becomes a hit, they certainly do. Iggy Azalea's inescapable Fancy was once on the Verge, and now can you turn on the radio without hearing it? Also around this time, music streaming was really beginning to give radio a run for its money. And of course, labels took notice, so not only vied for more play on the radio for their artists to be included in these media promotions like On the Verge, now they wanted to capitalize on streaming as well. While listeners, especially premium users, can choose what songs or albums they want to play, most of these music streaming apps work like radio in a sense also. If I click on one song, more will keep playing at random based on my listening tastes. Except sometimes it's not as random as you would expect. Aside from the more algorithmic playlisting, which changes based on the listeners, labels can have their songs added to more static playlists made by the services themselves, like Fresh Finds or Mint or Today's Top Hits or App Caviar if you're a Spotify user. These playlists can change too, and they do, but they don't vary from person to person. Presence on these playlists can be a way for artists to tap into millions of new listeners and make it seem like an accidental but lucky discovery. So really, while with streaming, it can feel like we have more power than ever before, which, we do. Sometimes these songs are handpicked for you by the labels just as much as the ones on the radio. Platforms like Spotify having a curated playlist for every genre, every mood, every activity, every season makes some listeners more inclined to choose those or at least see what they have to offer rather than handpicking their own songs to listen to. But at least you can skip those, I guess. In November of 2020, Spotify launched Discovery Mode, which they claim was a cutting-edge tool for music marketers. Discovery Mode would allow artists to have their songs pushed out to more listeners in exchange for taking a 30% cut in royalties per stream. This royalty cut only applies to streams gained through Discovery Mode, which includes appearing on Spotify Radio, Autoplay, and Daily Mix. The artist distributor has to be in a partnership with Spotify in order to use Discovery Mode, though. While some artists and managers found this to be an exciting new opportunity, others found it unfair, as artists were still at the mercy of the algorithm and would have to sacrifice even more money if they did get the Discover Mode exposure. But according to Spotify, within the first month of Discovery Mode, artists saw a 50% boost in saves, a 44% boost in playlist ads, and a 37% boost in follows on average. Labels can also pay for what Spotify calls a marquee. That's when you open your app and the notification that X artist has a new single or album out with the option to go directly to that new music. And this will be a notification that takes up the entire screen. The smaller banners that you sometimes see within the app that are also directing to new music are called Showcase, and both Marquee and Showcase are campaigns an artist or label can pay Spotify for. For Marquee, it says the minimum campaign budget is $100 or the equivalent in local currency, with the maximum being $10,000. While reading about all of this, I was reminded of comments I've seen floated around some of my own channel about how someone will be listening to a song basically of any genre. A lot of people even said hip-hop and then espresso would come on next. I was looking into it to see if I could find more about this possible playlisting, and there are several articles out there about people's so-called conspiracies on the espresso playlisting. A Vox article I read told the story of Spotify username Steven, who claimed no matter what song he selected on Spotify, espresso came up next. And he came to the conclusion that Sabrina's label is probably paying to have a playlist to just show up in people's algorithms, which is likely but unconfirmed, and the rest of the article goes into labels potentially paying for playlisting for other artists. The author, Rebecca Jennings, interviewed music industry insiders for the article, and she claimed while there was no hard proof that labels were paying for playlisting on streaming services, there was also no hard proof that they weren't, as deals between record labels and streaming services are often confidential. She did apparently reach out to Spotify, but they declined the interview. But Spotify did, however, maintain that an artist's growth, their popularity, was due to their own hard work. And none of this is to say that radio pay-for-play stopped in favor of it all moving over to streaming. In 2020, Rolling Stone did an expose after obtaining over 2,500 texts starting in 2018 involving independent radio promoter Steve Zapp, typically negotiating artist airplay. Several of these texts discuss billing or payment, allegedly in exchange for moving a song up or down, which meant playing it more or less. For example, one text reads, "Can we do Flora Cash and Khalid? Promise them 35 spins each. We'll cover that cash giveaway." There were also cases where Zapp allegedly asked radio stations to play artists less in order to play other artists like Halsey, Dua Lipa, and Marshmello more in order to get them to number one. Another text, one from 2019, reads, "This week kill Panic at the Disco and Ed Sheeran and put Sean's Superpower for number one. Republic is sweating me already." Superpower just means that a specific song, which for Shawn Mendes was If I Can't Have You, is one of the most played at the radio station at the time. If I Can't Have You was going to be bumped up to every 30 minutes in the rotation so that it would chart high, but as the tracking week came even closer to ending, Zapp allegedly requested it be played every 15 minutes, claiming no one would notice because people don't really listen to the radio. The song didn't top the Hot 100, but it did debut in the charts at number 2, which was its peak position. Zapp denied sending these texts, basically chalking them up to a disgruntled employee, and claimed none of them were even explicitly referencing any type of payola or pay-for-play. Each of the three major labels came out and denied involvement, claiming if these third-party promoters were engaging in illicit practices, it wasn't with their permission or at their behest. While they don't mention how involved their labels and teams were, the Rolling Stone article notes that no artists were implicated or directly involved in any of these text messages. Lastly, I feel like Payola is one of those phrases, kind of like Nepo Baby, that's got a social media definition too now, aside from what it actually means. Sometimes, and I've seen it a lot in K-pop, it can just mean the labels using their money and status to give their artists a leg up in a way, not necessarily radio player streams. When I was more active on Twitter, I felt like at one point I was seeing the phrase "hide Payola" several times a week. I think I saw it the most back in February when the news broke that Islet, a new group of theirs, was going to be at Paris Fashion Week as guests of Acme Studios, and this was before they even debuted. So the sentiment there was that they were invited to the event not because of their status, because they had no songs out, but had the connections of Hype to get them there. I think it could have been possible the girls were relatively well known because they were formed on a survival show, which meant they already had some fans and people were watching the show. I also assumed Islet showed up to the Acne show because they had some sort of deal with Acne, which they did, as they were the faces of their Spring/Summer 2024 campaign. So not necessarily Hybe Payola that Islet was at Fashion Week at all, but in my opinion, Hybe leveraged their standing to get a brand deal for the group, which is pretty normal for a label to do. Not sure how normal it is for it to happen before a group releases any music though, I will be fair and say that. Aside from that, Islet and Hybe were actually accused of pay for play or using playlisting to get more streams on their song Magnetic. Similar to Espresso, some Spotify users pointed out no matter what K-pop song they played, Magnetic would come next. I remember this was happening to me also for a while, and honestly didn't think too much of it because it was a newer and popular song within the genre I was already listening to. And I assumed it had become popular, one, because of the cutesy sort of Y2K sound that was already popular, and two, because of the choreo going viral. So not saying Hype didn't pay for playlisting or to appear in autoplay, because we've discussed that's definitely possible. But personally, I just saw the song as being created with current trends in mind, making it easier to get popular because it was tapping into what Hype had proof that people already liked, aside from the song coming from one of the biggest companies. Because even without any alleged pay-for-play Payola, they would have already had a leg up on groups that come from smaller companies or were never on TV prior to debuting. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe so that you can stick around for more. And if you'd like to become a channel member and get early access to videos, the link is in the description. Again, thank you so much for watching. I love you all so very much, and we'll see you so very soon. Bye-bye.